Ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. All right. Promoter 101. 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 Promoter 101.
Hey, it's Rich Best with Live Nation Los Angeles, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Do leftover Halloween candies and pumpkin spice lattes make you sick to your stomach? Is your seasonal affective disorder making you want to curl up on the couch with your weird blanket that has the sleeves on it and cry? Wish you could go to a random tropical beach with no cell service just to avoid your family this holiday season? If you answered yes or no to any of these questions, well then, boy howdy, do I have the solution for you. Hi, I'm Billy Bob Buckwood, and I'm here to tell you about Promoter 101. I used to be just like you. Look in the mirror, you'll know what I'm talking about. Until one day, a friend told me about this newfangled podcast called Promoter 101, and it changed my life forever. Not only did it make me significantly better at Sudoku, but it made me 2 1/4 inches taller and able to telepathically communicate with several types of fish. Now, you might be thinking, Billy Bob, how do I know if this Promoter 101 podcast thing is right for me? Well, let me tell you, in the form of a haiku, W. Luke Pierce and Steiny are here for you to make dope podcasts. And if that doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. Seriously, I have no idea. That was like the 3rd best haiku I ever wrote. So, anyway, listen to Promoter 101 right now and tell them Billy Bob sent you. Ha ha!
Welcome back to Promoter 101, the podcast. It's episode 107, if you're counting along. Dan Steinberg, hanging with, as always, W. Luke Pierce.
Here we go, Dan. Amazing podcast ahead. Later on, we're going to be joined by AEG Goldenvoice's Susan Rosenbluth. She's here to talk about her amazing history working in L.A., great market, tons of stories to share there. What else we got, Dan?
Chris Porter shares a tale of his time in Boston, Seattle, and now working on Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. Great guy, great story.
A lot of tales from San Fran and the new role that he's taken over. And later on in the podcast, joined by Paradigm's Trey Manny, who's going to turn the tables on you, Dan.
And news of the week with you, Mr. Pierce.
I'm going to have a special guest joining us later on. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, this is Cindy Leinott,
Kira Finkenberg,
Patty Ann Tarleton,
Whitney Bond,
Amy Miller,
John Holiday,
Marcy Allen,
Paula Palazzo,
Becca Leifer,
and you're listening to Promoter 101.
Promoter 101.
Promoter 101.
and I'm on Promoter 101.
You can listen to Promoter 101 pretty much fucking anywhere.
Spotify, we're on iTunes, we're on iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Music, YouTube, Spreaker. I'm sure I missed a few out there. Wherever you podcast, Promoter 101 is there.
We're on Twitter, Luke's W. Luke Pierce. I'm the Jew. The show is Promoters 101 or Promoter 101, whatever you like.
Follow us, keep up. We'd love to hear from you. And Dan, we're just about a week and a half away from the big keynote Q&A, November 13th. You're going to be sitting down at Billboard Live Music Conference at the Montage Hotel in Beverly Hills, interviewing Activist Artist Management's Bernie Cahill. I've been seeing a lot of ads and a lot of promo for this, Dan. What can we expect?
In real life, me and Bernie are less purple than the Billboard ad makes us look. I can guarantee that.
You know what? I don't think you could be any more red than the New Kids or Dropkick Murphys, who are also joining you at Billboard Live Music Conference. Very excited for your conversation. What are you going to be talking about?
Stuff.
Stuff.
I don't want to give anything away. It'll be stuff.
All right. Well, to figure out what that stuff will be, you can register for the Billboard Live Music Conference at billboardlivemusicsummit.com. Again, that's Tuesday, November 13th and Wednesday, November 14th. Hope you can join Dan and some great panelists, including Activist Artist Management's Bernie Cahill. See you there. And Dan, a couple weeks ago, we announced another live podcast coming up in the City of Brotherly Love in early 2019. Get ready. Philadelphia, we're coming at you January 30th. It'll be our first visit to the City of Brotherly Love. We'll be having some cheesesteaks, sitting down with some great guests. Who's going to be sitting down with us, Dan?
Well, we've got the one and only Jeff Gordon from Live Nation Philly. Plus, there's going to be a couple guest surprises coming along, but that'll be great. And it's a free one. So we'll be at the University of the Arts at Kaplan Recital Hall. That's 211 South Broad Street in Philly.
Right there on South Broad. Come check us out. Maybe the Eagles will be burning some couches or something at that point of the year. Very exciting time to be in Philadelphia. Check us out January 30th. University of the Arts. We'll see you there.
You can always reach out to us by emailing us at steiny@promoter101.net. You can find either of us there.
I'm Ashley Capps, founder and CEO of AC Entertainment, and I'm on Promoter 101.
If you've missed any of our past podcasts, well, catch the fuck up, motherfucker.
Get on it.
Yeah, man, get the fuck on that shit. This week, episode 63.
Great episode. When you tune back in, you're going to hear interviews with AG Presents, now Music City resident Mike Ducharme. Plus, we had one of the king of the cruises out there, Six Bands, Anthony Diaz. We had Ground Control Touring's Eric Dimmonstein, artist and author. You've seen him all over social media. Ari Hurstan, big DIY guy. Great interview there. We had XSDB Entertainment's Heath Miller and a war story from the man from the north, Mr. Jake Gold.
That's a great war story, talking about some American Idol things, what goes wrong when you get really nervous. I love Jake. It was kind of an all-star episode, and it was a lot of fun to do. Hey, you could always drop us a review, subscribe, and listen to Promoter 101, because, you know, it's fucking free. You know, the word of the week must be fucking, Luke, because I'm off to a great start with that.
It feels like you're saying fuck like it's a Monday, Dan, you know, not just like it's a Thursday afternoon recording this podcast.
Well, we're running a tad bit late and everything's getting just a little bit hairy this week. But hey, word of the week. When you hear the word fuck, well, I guess it's just a normal day because we all say it a lot. Anyway, listen to the podcast and give us your reviews. We badly don't give a fuck what you think about us. Matter of fact, we don't really care at all. I'm lying. We miss you. Don't go. Please stay.
This is Andrea Johnson from ICM Partners, and you're listening to Promoter 101.
News of the week.
It's time for News of the Week. Joining me on the News of the Week, our good friend from Amplify and Billboard magazine, Dave Brooks. Dave, welcome back to Promoter 101. How you been, man?
I'm good, Luke. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on Post-Acquisition Podcast. This is my first time.
I think it's now the post-acquisition podcast for several people joining us in this podcast as well, including Dan himself too. So we're in a new era where people are selling out. But congratulations again to you and your whole team, Taylor over there, for the sale of Amplify magazine to Billboard. Loving what you guys are doing and just very happy and proud of you guys.
Well, thank you. And I'm sure she appreciates that too.
While we're in the vein of Shameless Plugs Day, before we get to the news, let's talk about the Billboard Music Conference. It's coming up November 13th, 14th at the Montage Hotel in Beverly Hills. We all know that Dan is doing his thing, the keynote, Bernie Cahill from Activist Artist Management. I've alluded to a couple plugs throughout the weeks here that you've had some awesome guests also confirmed that you got new kids. I assume Jared Paul will be hanging around. You've got Dropkick Murphys. What else is going on and what can people expect before we talk about the news?
I'm so excited about the programming, that we have this year. I mean, look, we're just going to start it off right. We're going to do a half hour on holograms, and then we're going to do 45 minutes on legal weed before 10 a.m. So,
wouldn't it be better to do the legal weed before the hologram so that everybody is like in the super shocked state of mind when they see a hologram? Are you going to have a hologram on stage?
We're not going to have a hologram, unfortunately. It's weird. Like they're telling me like the holograms don't work without the full context. They're telling me it's not going to look the same at a concert as it would on a temporary ballroom stage at the Montage. But I mean, we have so many cool panels and stuff this year. We've got Taylor Bennett, Maddie Poppy, Andrew McMahon, and one of the ones I'm excited. Melinda Newman, our West Coast editor, is sitting down with Shawn Mendes and his manager Andrew Gertler for like a 30-minute in-depth interview. And we just got more artists and more forward-looking panels than we ever have before.
That all sounds fantastic, Dave. I got to ask here, most award shows at these conferences suck. How have you figured out the key to making your awards not suck?
We've put all of the brightest minds in Billboard at kind of figuring this out. And I think this is going to be one of the best award shows in these conferences I've ever been to. I mean, we've got John Mayer's going to be there getting Legend Alive Award. Sebastian Maniscalco is going to be getting the Comedian of the Year. Our host is Roy Wood Jr. from Comedy Central, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. It's going to have some celebrity moments. It's going to be funny and fun. And look, it's only going to be 90 minutes. Okay, let's be real here. Anything beyond that is not as fun. So it's going to be a quick, good time. It's going to be packed. And I heard Post Malone might show up. So that could be pretty cool.
That'd be pretty badass. So people can still register for this thing. Billboard Live, musicsummit.com, right? Still some space.
That's right.
Open?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Before we get into the news again, make sure you check out Dave's conference, November 13th, 14th, Montage Hotel, Beverly Hills. A lot of great shit coming forth from Dave and the whole team at Billboard, so check it out. How about some news, Dave? Let's hop to it.
I've been tracking kind of this dark money Ponzi scheme broker web for the last 2 years that really kind of blew up with the arrest of Joe Melly, who stole $95 million from hedge funds, rich investors, all types of folks, funding what he said were ticket purchases to flip, but were really just robbing Peter to pay Paul. In the last year, Craig Carton, who's a major sports radio shock jock in New York at WFAN, has gotten kind of entangled in Joe Melly's web. The U.S. Attorney's Office says that he stole $4.6 million from a hedge fund. And this whole time leading up to the trial, Carton has been saying that he really did plan to use his money. He had an inside deal for the Barclays Center in Nassau Coliseum to buy up tickets for shows, everything from Metallica to Barbra Streisand. He's now on trial, and this week the CEO of Barclays took the stand, Brett Yormark, and he testified that the agreements that Carton had been showing investors that he had all his tickets were fake. He said something like, looking at this now in front of me, I am angry. Kind of puts to bed this rumor that Carton maybe had this inside track and that Barclays was offloading millions of dollars of tickets directly to the secondary market. I guess it's a good story for Barclays and probably a bad one for Craig Carton.
I mean, is it really a good story for Barclays or anyone really connected and attached to this? Because we're seeing ticketing, as usual, just come under an increased amount of scrutiny. You've got conversations about Ponzi scheme with Joe Melly and Michael Carton here, and you've got Ticketmaster under fire now for some of these secondary things.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
is
Trade
anyone
Desk platform?
Yes. Is there any really good press that's coming out of this for any of these organizations? I mean, is a flat denial for Barclays the best thing? What does like a win look like for these ticketing companies?
Well, right. You're like, it's not necessarily a win. It's just not as bad of a loss. I mean, one of the most amusing things that has come out of this is that $2 million that were supposedly stolen by Craig Carton was wired from the hedge fund to Barclays Center to trying to buy tickets. Carton got on the phone, called the Barclays Center, and convinced them the wire was a mistake and got them to wire him the money. So in a way, he had them facilitate his own burglary, his own theft of this fund. So when you're kind of operating from that, where you've already been pretty embarrassed, I guess it can only get better if you can prove not everything was true.
Pretty low bar to be set there for success, I would say.
I think anytime you're dealing with these federal trials, stolen money, the bar is pretty low.
What should we stay tuned about this story? What's important? How is this going to play out? We obviously got Melly wrapping up his case, and Carton's out on bail for $500K right now. What should we be looking for ahead on this news story?
Well, hey, this trial's going to go about 2 more weeks, so I mean, we should see what Carton, when it's his turn to present his defense, like what he says, and then of course what the jury says.
All right. We'll stay tuned on this story. How about some news from Music City, Dave, here? We got some stuff from your colleague Hannah Karp putting forth a great story this week about the seemingly looming sale of Scott Borchetta's Big Machine label group. And, we've talked about this a few times on the pod now, but it seems like Big Machine is really down to a single suitor in the music business world, and that is Universal Music Group. As you reported in the past, the price tag for Big Machine has been raising as high as $300 million, and now UMG is only one of few remaining firms to be courting the Nashville-based music label home to Taylor Swift, Florida Georgia Line, Thomas Rhett, and so many more. It's also reported that Australia-based Macquarie Capital is reportedly still in the mix. This, according to a lovely article that your colleague published on Wednesday in Billboard. And Hannah also went on to speculate about the re-signing of Taylor Swift, who reportedly has asked for her master recordings back from Big Machine Label Group as part of any conversation with the label. Now, with Taylor's works accounting for nearly 35% of Big Machine's market share through August 2018, I don't know how likely they're going to be to put that on the table, especially amidst a sale here where so much of that price tag is going to be tied up in Taylor's catalog. So, I mean, which way does this story lean, Dave? What are you hearing about this? Is this going to be destined for a sale? Is this some sort of reorganization where Taylor Swift's a partner in this? I mean, there's so many potential outcomes in a deal setting like this. Where does it go from here, and what should we be looking for?
This is the big question. Reminds me of, will LeBron James leave the Cavs for the Miami Heat and take his talents to South Beach? I mean, you're right. There are so many possibilities. Just because not only will having Taylor decide what she's going to do next, but the sale looming over all of this. I mean, the question is really for Taylor is about going forward, what part of her publishing catalog will she own? And, what can she do to work towards getting equity in her past recordings? I mean, remember, she signed with Big Machine when she was, I think, 14 years old. So do we realistically think that she's going to get a piece of her catalog for re-signing with him? I mean, that's possible. But I think really I want to know is is Taylor, what's her deal going to look like going forward? Is she just going to have a distribution deal? Does she even need a deal with a Universal or a newly sold BMG? This is one of those topics that I would write a scenarios article where I would write 4 or 5 different scenarios of what I think might happen, not really knowing.
I would love to see what that shape and looks like. I feel like this is already a predetermined course and direction. So it's interesting to sit here and talk about speculating this. But do we really think that the capital behind Big Machine, which includes, by the way, Taylor's father, Scott Swift, and Toby Keith, among others, is really going to entertain some sort of grand reorganization? I'm not so sure about it. So we'll have to stay tuned as this thing comes to a close. From everything that I hear, this is like a race against the clock to get this done before the end of the year. That's all I hear from my end of things here in Nashville. So I assume we'll have some quick news before the end of the calendar year.
And it's an intense negotiation. So Hannah reported the story, and then, of course, Hits, as only they can, put out a 1-paragraph rumor piece that was just basically hey, that story's not true, according to sources. We later heard that it's probably somebody at Universal calling Hits, telling them, hey, don't let the public know that, we're the last ones in this. There's always somebody working the refs,
There always is, and especially in a town as small as this with the fervor moving around, such a big deal. There's a lot of things swirling around there, so it wouldn't surprise me that something leaked in that world.
It's going to be interesting. Like I said, this is the story to watch for at least to the end of the year. Something to keep us all busy.
Absolutely. What else we got?
Well, one of the stories I don't think is getting a ton of attention in our world, but I think is important for music, is the World Series. And looking at this pretty interesting deal that the Dodgers did with Eventellect out of Houston. It's no secret that sports teams have been selling directly to brokers for years. And that world has been getting consolidated by, all sorts of groups, from kind of private investors to hedge funds to just mega brokers, right? And this firm, Eventellect, they did a 1-year deal with the Dodgers this year where they basically bought up all the rights to all the broker tickets. Literally, the team canceled something in the ballpark of 15 to 20,000 broker tickets and put this company in charge of them to manage the resale, to manage how they're priced, to make sure they're not competing against their own tickets. I don't think it was any surprise to most people saying that. The only way this really paid off for Eventellect was if the team made the World Series. Well, they did, right? And so I've spoken with Patrick Ryan over there about how the deal went, and ideally there was 3 games in LA, the max amount of games that he could, sell tickets for. And so that was a good thing. And I think that he was able to hit the numbers he needed to, but it was such a crazy 3 games with that first 18-inning game 3 followed by game 2, we saw a score flipping in the 8th inning. He basically said, he's trying to sell these tickets and all the air was just taken out of the market by game 5. And it was interesting. One of the things he told me was that, to his surprise, while the Dodgers fans kind of backed off those game 5 tickets, everything was picked up, he said, by Red Sox fans who wanted to be there to see their team. And so he said, all in all, the experiment with the Dodgers works for him. But, I think there was a lot of backlash from fans as well. They controlled the price of the ticket, and these tickets were starting at $1,000, $1,100 get in the door. Not only was he facing backlash from these fans who thought this is a money grab, but he was also facing backlash from brokers. I mean, this deal with the Dodgers is subject of at least one lawsuit in LA where these brokers are suing to recover their money. So it's not a done deal. I don't know if this is the future of ticketing, but it's certainly been an interesting experiment to watch.
It seems like every sector of any ticketed live event, sports, concerts, otherwise, are really experimenting in really increasing velocity ways to circumvent resellers in a way that we've not seen in the past, 5 or 6 years. Of course, there's been forces always galvanized around scalpers and bots and legislation to support that now, but we're seeing more and more active participants in the kind of anti-secondary efforts and campaigns. Rightfully so. There's a lot of money at stake.
There's a lot of money at stake, trying to get that price between what the fan will pay and what you can charge for the ticket. But I think with these big deals with the Dodgers and other teams, it's about controlling the marketplace almost. It's about moving the market in the direction you want to either sell tickets on the front side through the box office or the back side through StubHub, But and one of the things I wonder is is that price fixing? Like you're trying to control an entire market for these tickets. And granted, it's your own tickets, and typically you have a right to control your own tickets. But when you try to control different market forces, you wonder if that is collusion. And I just can't help but wonder if the government's going to look at these things a little closer, depending on, I guess, who's running the various wings of law enforcement.
Well, if it has anything to do with anyone making a buck, I don't think anyone's going to look at it anytime in the next 2 years, maybe the next 6 years. So we'll have to stay tuned.
Hopefully 2 years.
Hopefully 2 years. Fingers crossed, but no one should be holding their breath.
Don't believe in humanity.
Yes, that's very true. If that's not news to you, I'm not sure what is. I just want to take a moment. Thank Dave Brooks, our buddy from Amplify, Billboard Magazine, for joining us today. Dave, we got to get you back here more frequent in the podcast. We really appreciate you joining us.
Hey, anytime, Luke. Congrats on taking the news. I like what you're doing, and I'll be on here anytime you want.
We're going to take you up on that for sure. Thanks again. Make sure you check out Billboard Live Music Conference at billboardlivemusicsummit.com. Go run Dave Brooks down at the bar at the Montage. Hope to see you all there in 2 weeks.
This fall, coming to a conference near you. Two legends meet face to face. Activists Bernie Cahill, Emporium presents Dan Steinberg, Billboard Live.
Bernie Cahill here. I'll be doing the keynote with Dan Steinberg at Billboard Live, Montage, Beverly Hills, November 13th.
And now it's time for everyone's favorite time of the week, the announcement of the Promoter 101 Badass of the Week.
This week, we are excited to announce the Promoter 101 Badass of the Week is going to a truly deserving concert promoter. From Live Nation Chicago, Jason Wright, overseeing Illinois, Iowa, Minneapolis, Nebraska, North and Southern Dakota. Yeah, we put the Dakotas last because, they earned it. For Live Nation, and he's just the coolest SOB in the business, making him our Promoter 101 Badass of the Week.
Big congrats, Jason.
He's a really, really awesome guy. I love Jason Wright.
You're talking Angels baseball. It's John Pennell over here at 8. What the? Oh, fuck. Oh, Promoter 101. Hola!
Our featured interview for episode 107 of Promoter 101. We're sitting down now with AEG Goldenvoice's Susan Rosenbluth. An amazing history in Los Angeles, and she's here to tell us all about it.
Susan Rosenbluth, thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Your career is kind of legendary. You've worked for several promoters, but one thing, no matter where you're at, where you're sending the offers from, you've got some of the coolest bands in the world that you work with.
I think so. I'm lucky that way. I've gotten to work with a lot of artists that I actually like the music of.
Now you're at AEG/Goldenvoice.
Mm-hmm.
There can't be a cooler brand in the business than Paul Tillett. So how did that come to be?
Well, in 2003, I got a call from Randy Phillips, who was then running AEG Presents, and said, hey, do you want to come over and work with Goldenvoice? And I said, sure. I talked to Paul and Rick Van Satten at the time who were running Goldenvoice.
So that was probably like right when they switched over from being an independent.
About a year later, yeah. And Goldenvoice was growing, kind of fine-tuning who we were as promoters. And I was just part of that process. It was a terrific experience to switch over.
You work in a handful of markets primarily, but you do more than just the coolest bands in the world. You work in the Latin market too, correct?
Yes.
So how did you wind up in that field? Because I guess there's no real other way to say it. White promoters haven't found a lot of success in that field, and you have.
Yeah, the Methodist turned Jewish girl doing the Latin promotions.
Well, I mean, it really has been a specialized field. Figuring out urban is something that our industry has been able to do, but that's an industry that's a little bit more, you got to be right on the pulse, almost like EDM. You really have to know what you're doing in that genre because you can't phone it in.
Correct. Early on in the mid-'80s, I got involved with Jorge Pinos and then other representatives of Latin talent. And Jorge was at William Morris at the time, and we did El Puma, Jose Luis Rodriguez. I think it was 85, maybe. It was a crazy experience, but it worked. It sold out the Greek Theater, and I was managing the Greek Theater at the time. And I realized pretty quickly that there were a whole lot of Latino Americans living in Los Angeles who were being underserved in terms of their music concert experiences. So I then started investigating and working on researching various genres of Latin music, because just like our general market music, you know, if there's 12 different genres that we do all the time at any given level of concert promotion, there are 12 different genres in Spanish language as well. And so I started actually focusing quite a bit, not only on regional Mexican, but on rock and Espanol, which is a genre that I really like.
So who would be some of the bigger stars for rock and Espanol?
Maná, Caifanes, Aterciopelados is one of my favorites. Maldita Vecindad. There's a lot.
But Maná kind of really hit the next level, right? Because they were at some point co-headlining with Santana across the country. Probably about as big as that genre gets, right?
Yeah, actually, the first talent I booked, starting at Goldenvoice, was Maná at the StubHub Center. They sold out all 27,000 seats.
27,000 tickets. Is that something they could do in multiple places across the U.S., or is that limited because we're so close to the border here in L.A.?
I would say that they have a large audience base in L.A., probably larger than anywhere else in the U.S. And there are probably 2 or 3 other markets where it would work really well, and they could do similarly.
Like a San Diego or a Phoenix, something like that?
Or Texas, various places in Texas, sure.
Things close to the border?
Not even close to the border, but where there's a large Latino population. The Latino population in the United States is growing consistently over the last 30 years. I'm not sure what the percentage is right now. Maybe it's 25 or 30% of the overall population, but it does keep growing.
So at the same time, you're still doing mainstream, cool alternative acts, like things like the Avett Brothers are just like right up your main alley.
Yeah, I tend to be a generalist. I think I'm pretty good at booking everything and figuring out what works, doing the research and understanding the music and the artist, which for me has been a fun part of the process.
Well, you're booking in one of the biggest markets in the world. I mean, Los Angeles and California, just a massive market, but the competition here is insane.
Right.
I mean, the number of buyers that Live Nation has in their California office is insane. Like the competition there, not to mention the number of buyers you guys have at AEG in California is insane.
We have a lot of buyers.
Like the internal competition for talent's got to be a little insane.
Well, we're pretty clearly defined on that, and I don't think we have any internal conflicts in our office, but I do tend to concentrate on things that other people aren't paying attention to.
So there's a niche to what you do because you do understand the Latin market like no one else
I
seems to.
understand the Latin market. I understand the K-pop market. I try to keep fresh on comedy because one of my primary responsibilities is the Microsoft Theater, where we do a lot of comedy. We did Russell Peters last night. And there are various, and I do a lot actually. I found a little niche with movie music, soundtrack music with live orchestra to the movie or a compilation of the movie. So I did Danny Elfman's music from the films of Tim Burton successfully, several performances, just finished one, which was Joe Hiyashi's music from the films of Miyazaki. And those have been selling out at the Microsoft Theater and the Honda Center and other places. Those are just wonderful presentations. And it's an interesting way to bring orchestral music to a younger audience that isn't going to Disney Hall every week.
You're bringing arts to the younger fan that may not be too in tune with it.
Yeah, one of the brilliant bookings that Paul T did at Coachella last year was Hans Zimmer, and that had a really big crowd, a great audience at that stage.
Seems like Bugs Bunny on Broadway has exploded across
Yes.
the different culture from the early Shed days.
And the gaming world actually has produced a lot of product in that area as well. We've done music from Distant World's Final Fantasy on more than one occasion, sold out at the Microsoft.
Yeah, I know Zelda has a tour, and I know Star
Zelda
Wars
has
has done
one.
some
Star
stuff.
Wars has done some stuff. I've done Star Wars, yeah.
Just
good fun.
Incredibly just diverse amount of place that you can be right now. You've got a venue, doesn't necessarily have to be the same concert setup or comedy show that traditionally has been out there for the last 40 or 50 years, and you're definitely finding a new vibe for some of that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Well, at the same time, there's different risk when you get involved with that stuff. You're reinventing the wheel in some of the marketplaces, so some of that stuff just hasn't existed yet.
That's true. When we started with Elfman, I think they'd only done it in Paris, so we did take some risk on that. But well rewarded. The bet was right. And that's happened with some other things as well.
As far as taking a risk on something like that, I would imagine there's got to be a conversation of, you work for a big corporation.
Right.
Is that going into Paul or going into Jay and saying, hey, this is a new idea, but I think it's worth taking the risk. We could possibly own this space, and there's probably a space here to be had?
We look at it on a project-by-project basis because you never, want to pigeonhole yourself or the venue. I do definitely talk to 2 or 3 people about it. And because we've been successful and done the research on prior products, then it usually comes to pass. And there are things we turn down as well.
So you're at possibly the coolest brand in the industry, Goldenvoice. Even before Coachella existed, when Paul and Rick were indies and they were in that little house at the end of Sunset or whatever, it was just cool. It didn't matter that No Doubt was still playing the Whiskey or whatever, and Dash All Crashers were playing the Roxy.
It's always about the music.
Down by Law was playing the Troubadour, and you could run through all 3 in the same night because those guys just had all those shows rocking. It just didn't matter. And the Palladium was theirs at that point, or was an open room, whatever it was. But they were just cool, doing cool things. But now, as the company has grown under AEG, you've got somebody like Elliot Lefko who's doing such creative things, and you who's doing such amazing creative things. It's completely a different brand, but still somehow fits into the coolness of what both of them had in Bob, Rick and Paul originally, and maybe even Gary at the onset.
Right. As long as it's good music or good comedy, we're fulfilling what is our ultimate goal. To me, the satisfaction comes from standing in the lobby as the audience exits the building and listen to people talk about what they just experienced over the last 2 hours and realize that they forgot all their problems, all their stresses of the day because they've spent that time with us and we fulfilled that expectation for them. To me, that's the satisfaction of the job. And at Goldenvoice, we each have the freedom to explore and do new things, which I don't think a lot of other companies offer.
Okay, now it would be easy to make it sound like you've never booked a bad show. And I don't think there's a promoter that's done the volume that you have that doesn't book a bummer from time to time. It's just, we all do. So percentage-wise, you've had a pretty high percentage of success rate, though.
I do.
So how often do you feel like you buy something that just wasn't there? Is it 10%?
I would say I bat 850.
That's not bad at all.
Out of every 10 shows, 8.5 of them make money, which is pretty good. And the most frustrating is the shows that are great, but don't have enough people in the audience. And I've been at several of those as well, where that either you're like a cycle too early, before an artist hits it. And I wish I could say I was doing Bruce Springsteen when there were 25 people in the room, right? But that wasn't one of my opportunities. So there are definitely those situations, and those are the most frustrating. And then there are the situations where you made a mistake. We all made a mistake, right? The agent, the manager, putting the artist in a room too big, or the ticket prices weren't right because we actually let the guarantee drive the ticket price, which we never should do. Those kinds of things.
It's amazing how we know we shouldn't do that, but yet we still don't want to lose the show. So
Yes.
we don't say no enough. And then, of course, there's the things that you can't control. A Game 7 falling in the city that you're in.
Right.
You can never predict it. You sell tickets months in advance that nobody's sitting in because nobody's missing Game 7. I can't believe the Cubs are in the series. Oh, my God.
Yeah, that does happen on occasion.
You can't predict it. I mean, LA weather's not usually the issue, but you can't predict that, which sometimes kills shows more in the middle of the country. Those hurricanes aren't helping anybody right now.
That's very true. In LA, we have luxury of not having to deal with weather very often. That's not a factor. And in LA, sometimes things get booked by others later than what you have already booked and put on sale, and you get stomped all over, or you have to move a date because you're going to be stomped all over. Sometimes on the Latin side, it's a prize fight that gets booked in Vegas with one of the boxers being, somebody that your audience is rooting for, and then you have to move a show. But you just pay attention to what's going on in the marketplace.
So, and I know he's not fighting anymore, he's retired, but if De La Hoya had announced a prize fight the night of a big headline event in LA, that could affect you, and it might be the best thing just to move your date out of the way so it doesn't get completely drenched.
We have done that before.
Amazed. I'd never thought about that. That's incredible. How much does the LA Vegas market conflict with each other normally?
I don't think there's a lot of crossover. I know that the Las Vegas promoters and casinos feel that LA is their primary feeder market. So there's definitely a radius that comes into play on occasion. But then after they've been in Vegas for a while doing some of these residencies, well, then, anybody that goes to Vegas regularly from LA for their entertainment might have already seen them there. And we take that into account when we do our math on our bookings in LA.
LA has been a thing for you for a long time because you were with Nederlander before you came over to Goldenvoice. So you got to see and work in the market long before it came, but the rise of the complex LA Live. Downtown was basically abandoned here in Los Angeles. And then suddenly Anschutz revitalized that whole community and made an entertainment complex. Did you have to retrain the fans to go downtown for shows at first?
We didn't have to train the fans as much as we had to train the industry. There were definitely some people in the industry amongst agents and managers dragging their feet, not believing that people would go downtown, including some of our radio station partners on some occasions.
Haters gonna hate.
But they came around. Once they experienced it, saw it, I would say 1 or 2 years into it, it was pretty evident that it was a huge success and continues to be that.
Is it shocking that there's not more shed action in this market, that there aren't 4 sheds in the California area? I know there had been in the past been those rooms, but it seems like this is a market that should have that.
I experienced Pacific Amphitheater versus Irvine Meadows firsthand for several years when I was at Nederlander. There was no question that those 2 sheds should not have both been built. There was room for 1 shed in the market, not 2. So I think it's found its equilibrium right now.
The Greek clearly is on a great run right now. Everyone wants to play there. Obviously, the city lost something big when the Gibson or Universal, whatever you want to call that, amphitheater went away, because that was a really important facility for the market. But it seems like there's a missing piece in this market right now.
I'm not sensing that myself. You've got lots of options still. There's a plethora of venues. And yes, there are times when everything's booked on a given night, but it's not that often.
I guess the Hollywood Bowl would count as a real shed in the market. It exists.
The Hollywood Bowl is, absolutely.
You got to feel for acts that have to settle for that.
Yeah, it's tough on those artists. The Hollywood Bowl's a go-to, Staples Center's a go-to, Greek's a go-to, Microsoft, Forum, a Honda Center. There's just so many choices. And I think that artists cycle through LA often enough with enough frequency that they can, over time, pretty much play all of them.
Not to mention the stadium shows have certainly seemed to kick up over the last handful of years.
That's true. I think stadiums go hot and cold. You'll see a year in which there are good 3 or 4 or 6 artists playing stadiums, and then years where there's only a couple.
It seems like it's been heavier the last 5 years.
But I agree. It's been definitely on the uptick.
It's amazing how many shows can be playing at that level simultaneously. The arenas, the theaters, the stadiums, all simultaneously in the same night. An A market like this can have Staples, Forum, Greek, an amphitheater show playing the bowl, and still somehow there's a full-on stadium show happening simultaneously at Dodger Stadium, and all of them sell. It's amazing.
It helps that there's something like 11 million people in the greater LA area. Doesn't hurt.
Doesn't hurt at all. So with that, when you're looking at a market this size, are you normally thinking go bigger than the rest of the country? Or are you thinking multiple nights? The extra number of people that are here, does that mean that the shows are going to sell better?
I try to talk to the artist representative to get a sense of what the presentation is going to be for that given artist and what sensibility or attitude the artist has towards that cycle of touring. Sometimes you want to play smaller. We're doing Pistol Annie's soon at the Novo, which is an underplay. And we're doing Town Hall in New York also, underplay for them, with some new product release, obviously. And that happens with a lot of bands. And I love doing those because those are just fun to put a big artist into a small room. And then there are situations where some artists, and there aren't that many, but I have encountered artists that always want to play a room that they won't sell out because they never want to turn anyone away. So then you have to find the right size room where they're going to get close to selling out.
So it looks good.
So it looks good because I hate to paper. Everybody in the office knows that Susan does not paper. So
trains the audience not to buy tickets.
Correct.
When you're buying LA, how much do you factor in if it's going to be the only play for Southern California versus are they playing Anaheim? Are they playing San Diego? Are they playing Santa Barbara?
You have to look at each situation individually and the popularity of that artist. Fortunately, there's research you can do via various social media to see where the pockets of fans are for that artist. It may be that an artist would do better in Orange County than in LA. It doesn't happen very often, but That does happen on occasion. Certainly on the Latin side, there's been circumstances of that.
So Orange County's been stronger than LA?
Yeah. If you look at the population of Orange County, I think a lot of the recent immigrants from Spanish-speaking countries sometimes congregate more in Orange County than in LA. You just look at each situation individually and see what the artist rep tells you is the goal of the artist for that cycle of touring or for that play in LA.
You got this amazing career where you get to play in pretty much whatever ballpark you want to at this point. But how do you get there?
You develop a relationship. You start early. You keep your ear to the ground. So if there's something that you really think is good and you see it early, you pay attention early.
How did you get there?
Oh, how did I get there? I kind of happened into it. I was interested in running a venue, and I knew that in college. I was like, I'm going to be a venue manager. That's what I'm going to do. And I moved out to LA. I followed my then boyfriend, now husband, to LA. He worked in the film industry. And I said, okay, I have to work at a venue. So I got a job at the Greek sorting keys for a day. And then they said, you want sorting keys? Because we had just taken over. We'd had new management at Nederlander at the Greek. So there was a box of keys. And I was tasked to go around the building on Memorial Day and go around the building and figure out which key went to which door.
So you're just literally putting every key in a lock.
Sorting keys. That was my job straight out of school. And so I did that for a day or two, figured that out. And someone in the office said, oh, do you want to sell souvenirs? I said, sure. They saw that I had run box offices when in college for little theaters and worked on theater management and as kind of as a, not a minor, but a task in college, something that I studied. So then they put me in charge of souvenirs about a week into the season. And the smartest thing I ever did in my entire career was that I would sit on the couch at the end of the night in the lobby waiting for my now husband, who was the parking director at the Greek at the time. He got a job as parking director.
So he was the last one out because all the fans had to go.
He was the last one out, putting away all the barricades and what have you. So I'd sit on the couch for an hour waiting for him. I didn't have a car, waiting for him. And instead of sitting on the couch, I went to the GM of the Greek at the time, Bob McTire, and I said, if you put me on the minimum salary, I will work as hard as I can possibly work to learn how to do whatever you need me to do. Pay the bills, do the payrolls, what have you.
Catch all.
Because I kind of saw that the two women that were in charge of that didn't work that hard, also in my observation. And so he agreed. And I ended up working harder than I've ever worked in my life for that first year. And by paying the bills, doing the settlements with the artists, and doing the payrolls, I understood where all the money went. So I had a broad overview pretty quickly of how that building ran. Just was probably the smartest thing I ever did was to go to him and make that request.
So you got to see where all the bodies were buried.
Yeah, I got to understand how all the puzzle pieces fit.
Now, how did you go from putting the keys in the doors and figuring out which key worked where? And by the way, if you've never been to the Greek, it's not a club. It is an amphitheater, and it is built into wilderness, so that is a task and a half.
It was at the time.
Obviously, that helped, that working your ass off, but how did you go from that side into the booking side?
Well, what happened was, as there was attrition with bookers, they'd be picked off by other promoters, what have you. There'd be an opening for a booker, and because I settled all the shows, I actually helped one of the bookers a great deal in presenting his offers and doing his offers. And I always gave opinion on whether we should book something or not when we discussed it internally. I was offered the job. And I was offered the job twice before I took it. I took it on the third offer. The first two times, there were too many bookers in the office already. I think there were 4 the first 2 times. And I wasn't going to be the 5th booker because there were a lot fewer artists then, a lot fewer agencies, and a lot fewer people touring because the record business was strong, right?
Can you give us a circa year roughly?
I'd switched over, I think, in 95.
Okay.
So I turned it down the first 2 times because I was going to be the 5th booker in the office. And I knew that I just
Traffic wasn't the same back then.
Yeah, traffic wasn't the same. I'd be given the least exciting bookings because everyone would be territorial about their booking.
Right, and your last starts at the
trough.
And
their relationships. And I had developed a lot of relationships by managing the building for those years.
Being here in LA, all the agents are here.
Being in LA, they're all here. We gave them,
even if not, the New York guys and the national guys would fly in for the LA shows.
And we gave them the infamous entrance pass, which let them stand against the wall the whole year between Section A and Section B. So I knew a lot of people. But I didn't want to be the 5th booker. So finally, by the time I was the 2nd booker in the office is when I took the job.
You waited. It was a lot easier booking.
A lot easier to book when you're the
probably
2nd booker in the office.
Competitive deal you could cut at that point, too. They're probably pretty desperate.
Yeah, so I picked up some good accounts.
All that payroll from the last 3 guys that left.
Exactly.
Okay, so somewhere in the ballpark in 95, you switched over to booking.
Yeah.
23 years at least just booking. That's some serious time in one market to build history, to build acts, to develop. And you already had the relationships in place with most of those agents.
The first show I ever booked was Johnny Cash with Beck opening.
Wow.
And Beck had just put out the Loser song.
So it was like 94, 95 right in there?
Yeah, somewhere in there, right near the end of Johnny's career. And I'll never forget standing on the side of the stage at the end of the show. Beck had done an acoustic set, by the way. He was like a young Garrison Keillor. Yeah, he opened for Cash. And it was during the Americana Cash years. And Henry Rollins was standing next to Maury Amsterdam waiting for talent to come out. And Henry Rollins was waiting for Beck, and Maury Amsterdam was waiting for Johnny Cash. And
in the Dick Van Dyke Show?
As in the Dick Van Dyke Show, Maury Amsterdam. And I said to myself, it does not get better than this.
And somehow I imagine Lou Robbins is backstage directing it all.
Lou Robin is who I booked it with. There wasn't an agent involved in that very first booking.
Really?
Really.
Because he'd always been APA Nashville, but Lou being Lou.
Lou being Lou, right? It's his signature on the Beatles contract for the Hollywood Bowl in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. He was the promoter.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Pretty sure.
First manager to ever yell at me, Lou Robbins. The pleasure of promoting a lot of the last Johnny dates, but disappointing Lou is something that I will never forget.
Yeah, you don't want to disappoint Lou.
You don't do it twice. So that's cool. So Johnny's your first show. Beck is opening.
Yeah.
All-star cast backstage.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
How do you top that?
I don't think I did for a while, but it's always been fun. It's always been something that I enjoy, which is why I still do it.
So can you give advice to some of our listeners about how to have the longevity in your career?
Well, you have to stay current. You have to do your homework. Relationships are everything, which I know pretty much everybody on this podcast has always said. And you realize that pretty early. You have to have an opinion. When I was young, apparently I was very confident, which I didn't know it at the time. Go figure. But
that's a great line.
You have to have an opinion. And if you don't have an opinion, you're not really going to get anywhere in your career. Because what we do is a lifestyle. It's not a job. Fortunately, our significant others and the people in our lives recognize that and deal with that. And for me, that's worked out really well. So,
well, I want to thank you so much for taking time and being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Susan is pure class. Love getting to know her, and I look up to all of her accomplishments. She's just simply in her league of her own in this business.
I'm Sarah Beasley from Wolf Trap, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Tweets of the week.
The time you cannot avoid it. It's the name of this podcast, so let's talk about them. Dan, your tweets of the week. Let's start here. Dear road managers, it's called advancing in hopes that you'll actually call in advance instead of on the day of the show.
Requesting cash on a Saturday afternoon for a Sunday show is never going to work out well for you. The more time you give us, the more chance we're going to have to succeed. Work with me. Help me help you. Little Jerry Maguire there for you.
Dear agents and managers, this seems simple. If you're grossing $75,000, why freak out at any offer under $100,000?
Methinks you are overvaluing your clients.
How about this? That moment when an agent asks you for more money without a competing offer against you, and you respond, uh-oh, go fish.
It's funny how that date always seems to wind up confirming for the original offer.
And that'll do it for some Promoter 101 tweets of the week. Keep up with Dan between now and the next podcast. You can follow him on Twitter. He's at The Jew.
Hey, this is Kevin French, and I'm on Promoter 101.
It's time to turn the tables. It's time to turn the tables.
Dan, it has been a moment since we aired a Turn the Tables segment on this podcast, but time to bring it back this week with Paradigm's Trey Manning, turning the tables on Steiny.
I'm going to let you turn the tables on me. You got a question for me?
So, Dan, we've been talking a little bit about moving from independent music business world to a more corporate business world. You are making a transition of sorts, I'm told, by the trade publications. Is there anything that you want to make sure that you bring with you to the other side, or anything that you're worried about losing that you want to hold on to as you're making your transition?
We met with a bunch of people before we made a decision and listened to a whole bunch of the conversations and the pitches. And honestly, I got to say that Live Nation's ethos of run your company the way you guys want to run your company, don't change the formula, it's working, was the coolest thing I had heard. And then I went and talked to the guys at C3, and Charlie Walker and Charlie Tull were like, no, they let us run our business. And when we fuck up, they're there to help steer us out of trouble. Their minds at work. And I talked to a handful of the other companies that also had made the same decision. I talked to the guys at AC, talked to the Franks, and heard similar things. It's like, we run our business. They're there to help. Instead of having 3 or 4 minds around the table, we now have 3,000 different talent buyers that we can call on at any given moment, or bigger minds that run the company that say, you know what, we've tried this in the past and it doesn't work. And I have found that they are some of the most genuine, forthright people I have ever met. And it really seems like they wanted us to feel comfortable running our business. And so far, I haven't seen anything to the contrary of that. We're still Emporium. Our emails are still Emporium. And I've yet to see anyone tell me or ask me to do something otherwise from there, except for the fact that they've introduced me to a ton of people that I didn't know that are great resources, which is a cool thing.
That's awesome.
But it's a scary thing going from being an independent for so long, as you know, to the big, scary corporate umbrella that, you fear once you're in, you're in. And I feel comfortable. I've had some time to get used to this and knew it was coming for a minute, and I feel okay with it. I don't think it's going to change. I think I can still do the stupid things that I do. They encourage the podcast. I think it's a good thing for the industry. They don't ask me to interview anyone from Live Nation. They're not dictating anything or asking anything of it. They just think it's a good resource, and they've been very helpful. So in general, yeah, I think it's a less scary thing than I would have thought.
That's great. Congratulations.
Appreciate it, Trey.
Yeah.
Trey will be with us for a feature interview next week, episode 108. And let me just tell you right now, spoiler alert, guy knows his shit.
No surprise there.
Jim Glancy, Barry Presents on Promoter 101.
In our final interview this week, we're sitting down with Chris Porter. He's going to tell us some tales from Boston, Seattle, and now he's in the Bay working on one of the coolest events in the world in Hardly Strictly Bluegrass.
We're coming to you live and direct from beautiful downtown Auburn at the world famous headquarters of Promoter 101. I'm joined today by a legend in both Boston and the Seattle area. Chris Porter is in the house. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
I am so honored to be on the podcast. Thank you for having me and having me at Promoter 101 headquarters, too.
Anyone that knows you knows the story starts in Boston. That's your roots. You're a huge Boston fan as far as sports teams. You root for that god-awful Tom Brady. You love the Red Sox. God bless you. I feel like they only won and beat the curse of the Bambino because they were just appeasing you. And yet you were so true blue fucking New England, whether it's music, which I celebrate, or your shitty sports teams, which I don't. Like,
they're
everybody
not too shitty.
knows
We got a lot of championships. What can I say? But it's in your blood, and you can relate to this. When it's in your blood, it should never change.
What's that, cheating?
Victory and well, no, actually,
I don't want to deflate your ego on this.
And devotion.
See what I did there with
devotion to your teams and the bands or whatever it is you love that you grew up with. Staying devoted to things, I think, is a good thing.
Well, we're old friends, and I feel it's okay to kid you because you've got this addiction to this very, very bad team. But that's okay.
A Bronco fan telling me this. Okay.
Hey, my team won this week.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, that was a good game.
Anyway, let's talk about music. So you worked at a club, and this was a club that was amped up a little bit by the celebrity owners, right?
Well, that was my third club, yeah. So that was Mamakin Music Hall. I guess you're referring to.
I'm talking about Aerosmith.
Aerosmith, yeah.
Also famously from Boston.
They were, yes, indeed. Although I guess Steven Tyler was originally from upstate New York somewhere. But yeah, it was great. I got to sort of indirectly work for Aerosmith. They half-owned a venue called Mamakin Music Hall, and I oversaw the booking of that for a couple of years. Prior to that, though, I was at a pretty seminal club, at least in Boston lore, called Bunratty's. That was my first one.
It was called what?
Bunratty's, which is actually, it looks like it sounds. It was like this dark, black brick kind of rock and roll room, but it's actually named after an Irish castle, Castle Bunratty, somewhere in Ireland. So
it's a terrible fucking name.
But you know what? If you saw Bunratty's, it kind of fit.
Is it kind of a dive thing?
It was kind of, it was like a 300-cap room, good rock and roll drinking bar, good stage, good sight lines, good sound, but it was dark and smoky, and, it looked like it sounds.
Kind of a CBGB's for the area?
Kind of. The Rat was sort of more the CBGBs. This was a little bit of a different flavor, and it was a little more, wasn't just all punk. We did all kinds of different rock acts, but that's where I cut my teeth really in, regularly doing shows. And so I was there at varying degrees for 3 years. Then the Middle East, which is still around, the Middle East Club in Cambridge, shortly after they opened up their downstairs room, which is a 500-cap room, I think is what they do now. I was booking that, and so I did that for 2 years. And then I got courted by Tim Collins, who was Aerosmith's manager at the time, and to book Mamakin Music Hall, which I did for 2 years.
And at some point, you made this huge commute and jump from beautiful Boston to Seattle, which vibe-wise, you can't get much different than Boston folks and Seattle folks, because the aggressive-aggressive versus the passive-aggressive, it is two different worlds of snobs. But have you know right, they are both fucking snobs.
Well, there's snobs everywhere, man. You know, it's got to cut in and try to find the real people, I think. But
I'm
to
not
your point, you're right.
excluding myself from these people.
Yes, I agree with you. Generally speaking, that the vibe of the people is sure different for like what you just said. But in a way, Seattle kind of reminds me of a huge version of Cambridge, because Cambridge is a kind of its own vibe from Western Boston. It's very, very lefty.
What do you think? It's smarter than me?
It's smarter, you know, and all very neighborhood centric. And they used to call it the People's Republic of Cambridge. And then when I came to Seattle, they called it the People's Republic of Seattle. So in some ways, it was an easy transition. And I knew some people here beforehand, so I was welcomed. But it was a huge change going from one end of the country to the other. But it was, you know, an offer I couldn't refuse.
Okay, so you get involved with what is a massive festival, Bumbershoot. And you wind up as the junior buyer there, or the assistant buyer there?
No, I was there as the music buyer. Programming manager was the title of it. And that meant I was the main music programmer for the festival. Throughout my 18 years there, I was the main talent buyer for all the music. The last 4 or 5 years, I was program director, which was essentially a similar job, but I was overseeing some bigger picture stuff. But yeah, no, I was always the music programmer there, and I usually booked anywhere from 80 to 100% of the acts.
Oh, okay. So I always assumed that you and Michelle had this.
Michelle came a little later, and she was Michelle Scolari, my old friend and an old cohort. She came in to do Summer Nights on the Pier, which was a concert series that we did on the Seattle waterfront for many years.
Yeah, I remember seeing Ani DeFranco there, and then the pier got condemned, right?
Well, yeah, they said we couldn't put 4,000 people on it, and they needed to fix it and more pilings or whatever. And about, I think that was, I don't know how many years ago, over a dozen years, and they're just starting to work on it now, it seems. But yeah, that's why we had to move it. We moved it to South Lake Union for 1 year, and then it just, for a variety of reasons, ended.
It was a great season. You guys had some of the best shows, like start to finish. Really one of the better places to see shows. And it was the only downtown Seattle location to see an outdoor show that was in the city proper. And still to this day, there's really not an outdoor venue in the limits of Seattle that's under 7,000 seats.
That's right.
There's only the stadiums, actually. There are no amphitheaters in Seattle proper.
Yeah.
Because there's no fucking land in Seattle proper.
There's no land. And then even if they get this, there's talk that the city would love to bring concerts back to that when it's done. But I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. We'll see.
Okay. So Michelle had moved on. You wound up doing all the music stuff across all the platforms when she left, on top of whatever else. But Bumbershoot was always your baby, and you were synonymous with it, and were there for...
Right. That was like 80% of my work was Bumbershoot. Yeah.
And you got to do some creative things on the side, like the fireworks show at the Needle, like you do the music score with that?
Over Lake Union.
Okay, the 4th of July, sure.
But yeah, I curate the soundtrack that the fireworks were orchestrated to. So I did that for a while.
It was always a little hipper than the average national fireworks show, which is great.
I'd like to think so. Yeah. So I did that.
You'd see it on TV, and then you'd see Chris's name during the credits. That's so awesome.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes they interviewed me afterward, too. Why did I pick a certain song or something? It was funny. That was a good exercise I did for about 9 or 10 years, yeah.
But you've had that DJ side of you, because you're a true music nerd, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, I'll accept it. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, our industry is big on that. That's not a bad thing in this world.
Yeah.
Like, your music and get into some of those B-sides. If there was a C-side, you'd know that too.
Absolutely, man.
So you've got that. What's your favorite thing to play when you're spinning?
I haven't been DJing much these days. I used to a lot. And my typical thing was, I do different kind of styles, but I was more notable for doing like old school soul, like our friend Scott Gimpino and some others, around here do, or like old, like kind of 60s mod or Britpop kind of things. I was always into the Anglophile mod kind of thing. So that was kind of my usual style. But I would do all kinds of styles. Electronic stuff and whatever.
Things have changed a little bit. You're no longer at Bumbershoot. You started your own company, and that's led to some really cool things. So you're booking in Boston and booking here, and now you've expanded into the San Francisco Bay Area market.
Indeed, yeah.
Tell us about all of these things.
My last year at Bumbershoot was 2014, and it was a great 18-year run, very proud of it, but a variety of reasons it was time to move on. And I had a small company just simply called Porter Productions, LLC, on the side, just to do small things like you mentioned, DJing, and I do that a little bit, but out of necessity, because I really wasn't sure sure what I was going to do, and I was looking around at some other opportunities around the country, none of which really came through or were ideal for me. So I just kind of put game face on and worked really hard to develop my company as a bigger thing. And so essentially, what happened is I ended up with a couple of contracts on my lap, and then it just grew from there. So what I do is talent buying, production coordination, or consulting for various events. And it started off mostly in Seattle, although my life going full circle, an old friend of mine, J.J. Gonson, opened up a venue called Once Somerville, ONCE Somerville, which stands for One Night Creative Event. It's an old Italian function hall that got turned into a venue. And Somerville sort of turned into the Brooklyn of Boston in a way. So this is early 2016. So long story short, I ended up starting to oversee the booking of that venue.
What's the cap of that?
375 ballroom and 100 cap lounge. So we could do shows in both rooms. And so I oversaw the booking of that. So that was in a lot of ways my anchor. But I was doing some things for Benaroya Hall in Seattle, curating some special shows, EMP, which is now called Museum of Pop Culture, but I was curating a series of shows for them. I do a smattering of some club level things, South Lake Union Block Party, which I still do this day. It's something that Vulcan puts on in the South Lake Union area. I book that. And there'd just be a smattering of different things. So I did that that was 2016. So that was quite a successful year for me. But then in 2017 was a solid year too. But it was funny, over time, just most of my businesses started to switch more to Boston and less in Seattle. Like I still work on South Lake Union Block Party and a smattering of some smaller things. But now in Boston, I still oversee Once Somerville, although I have an assistant named Bridget Duggan, who's more the point person on that because I have too much on my plate. I do a thing for radio station WERS, which is affiliated with Emerson College. They had a big event called Wicked Good Festival.
Wicked Good?
Wicked Good, a perfect name for Boston, right? And so that was like Bleachers, Buffalo Tom, Juliana Hatfield, and a number of other bands that get played on that station.
It is Wicked Good. Jesus.
And it was a big free festival.
It's free.
Interestingly, which we'll get to in a second, 3 of my 4 major events are free ones. I'm kind of pinching myself about that. So that was great. It was about 5,000 to 10,000 people at that this year. This was the first year, but they intend to do it every year. So that was a big thing to do there. And then I'm also producing my own festival, not a free one, in my old hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts, where I grew up. Old mill town, historic town, which is growing, especially in the arts
Fisherman
community,
right?
No, it's more central. It's near the New Hampshire border. It's probably most famous for being the home of writer Jack Kerouac, among other things. And it was an old mill. It's where the textile industry started. So you had all these old mills. Nothing was happening with them for many decades. And now the last 20, 30 years, it's been really fixed up. So I started a festival. It's called the Town and the City Festival, which is named after Kerouac's first book, which was largely about Lowell. And it's sort of in the style of like a South by Southwest, Treefort Music Fest, that type of thing where, wristband and it's kind of a venue bouncing format. So
that's fun.
That's coming up. Starting a new festival is a huge undertaking, even though this is a smaller thing than some of the other things I work on, but
You're building a
that's
template.
Building a template. So it's hard, but if I can take what I've learned in 21 years and apply it to my old hometown, that's super special. So
who's your headliner on that?
It's a lot of smaller stuff, like 500 cap is the biggest room. So we have people like Kristen Hirsch, Andrea Gibson, who's a well-known spoken word artist, Reckless Eric. It's mostly a lot of local bands, Will Daly being maybe one of the more well-known ones, Kingsley Flood, Chris Trapper from Push Stars. So that's on that one. So that's what I've got my plate in the Boston area. And then the thing that was a huge game changer for me and that's been an absolute joy to work on is Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, as you mentioned, in San Francisco. I just got
So Don Holliday has retired and you are taking up some very big shoes to fill there.
Indeed.
The lineup's just come out, right? So people are swooning over how good the lineup is this year.
I'm glad to hear. I'm psyched about it. It came together. I started really late, and this is a testament to how special that event is to a lot of bands, that 80% of my first offers were all accepted. I mean,
really?
Usually I have to have plan B, C, and D ready. Everybody wanted to play, and people who couldn't play it or couldn't accept, it was more of a timing issue, and they're like, let us know next year. We want to do it sometime. So it got put together relatively quick. I mean, 81 acts. I mean, that's only like 20 to 30 less than I did at Bumbershoot, and it got put together really quickly. And I have a great crew of people I'm working with there. I'm very grateful to get that gig.
What's special about this, and we've had Don Holliday on the podcast to explain this from her point of view in past years, is that it's a music fan that it was very successful in the world, wanted to give something back, but he just really wanted to bring this festival together. So it was always about curating this live event that would just be fun for him. And he made part of his estate, if I remember this correctly, after he passed, as part of a continued donation to make sure that this continued on. Is that right?
They set up a foundation. So the Hellman family is very dedicated to keeping it alive. A lot of them play music, so they're really into it. We're talking about music nerds. I mean, Warren Hellman, who was the founder of it, and so many of his family are just such, music nerds like all of us. It's great.
But Warren passed, though, right?
Warren passed a few years ago. That's right. So they set up a foundation, Hellman Foundation, simply, and that oversees the
legacy
festival.
just continues, which is so awesome and giving, and what an amazing way to share the arts. And you're talking about acts that would normally headline for $35 or $95, depending on which of the acts it is, and could do their own Fillmore or Winterland or Palace of Fine Arts or UC Theater. Like, these are real acts. I mean, some of these acts could headline the Fox or the Paramount Oakland. These are real big acts, and they're all playing these shows like right out in the park. You don't need a ticket. You just show up.
You just show up, and it's a beautiful park. I mean, when you're in the middle of Golden Gate Park, because it's in the area where there are just a lot of these long meadows. Have you been before, Dan?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So you know what I'm talking. So you almost don't even feel like you're in San Francisco. It's just this own world, and it's just very conducive to the music that's been programmed there. And everybody in the Bay Area loves it. And 500,000 or more people come over a 3-day period. And then I know a lot of friends in our Seattle area here and everything are heading down for it too. I've been to it before as well, and so that was unlike Bumbershoot when I started in '97. I had never been to it before, so it was kind of daunting to work on it. But I have been at Hardly Strictly, and so I know what I'm getting into, and I can't wait for it. I'm psyched.
So Don Holliday, who's a legend in our industry on Slims and Great America, was very big in San Francisco, and she worked for Graham at one point. She's like a legend in that market, and she cultivated this forever. And we all know her because, even if you weren't in the San Francisco market at South by, she ran the promoter agent meeting.
Yeah, that's where I met Dawn, was South by, yeah.
You would see her not only navigate this meeting, but there wasn't a louder voice in the room that could keep control over all of the agents and talent buyers. Like, you couldn't out yell her, you couldn't out gun her. She was the person in the room that everybody respected enough and feared enough that could control that meeting. And back in San Francisco, everybody looks at her the same way. She's beloved. And when I say feared, I don't mean like people are afraid to cross her. I mean like nobody ever would, because she's fucking Don Holliday. She's amazing. She knows all, and you can't really outdo that. So you're taking in some very big shoes. Is that intimidating?
First off, I'm honored, and I agree with everything you just said about Dawn, and she's been very gracious and being somewhat of a consultant still. I mean, I sat with her. She's been like, a resource for me if I needed it. I have her blessing on all of this, so I'm grateful for that.
You called and had the conversation. She was like,
yeah, we had coffee when I first got the gig in March, and I went out for about a week's worth of meetings and orientation. She and I sat down, and we've been in touch on, an email and phone and all. So, I mean, I expect I'll probably see her at the event. But to your question, maybe for about 5 minutes, but at the end of the day, I'm going to take care of business. And I've done this for 18 years, with Bumbershoot. And so that's given me a lot of confidence to be able, and also the fact that I feel like I know that event pretty well and the aesthetics of it. I mean, I'm still in a learning curve. I'll probably be for a while in a lot of aspects of it. But I feel that with my background, I was going to be a good fit for it. I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I hope I have been, and I think I have been. I'm very honored to follow Dawn. And I'm not going to be my own person, and I'm not going to try to repeat everything Dawn does or says or anything. But I think I'm a good fit for this, and it feels good, and it's not too daunting for me.
You've been in the industry now for, 25, 27 years, something like that?
If you really go exactly when I really started, like I make my first couple of bucks at it, I was probably 20 years. So, yeah, it's about a little over 30 years now.
30 years. 30 years of making it on rock and roll. Some of the younger whippersnappers coming up behind us, any advice for how to last in rock and roll for 35? You haven't had a real job in 30 years. Jesus Christ.
I know. My mom was always saying, gee, maybe you might want to go to grad school someday. I mean, I think she finally gave that up by the time I was at Mamakin or something. But
you're going to be a doctor yet, Chris?
You're going to be a doctor,
Chris. Law school.
Something, yeah.
Enough of this rock and roll crepe.
I think to be in this business, you really have to have the right temperament and be honest with yourself that you have the right temperament. And I think you need to be good to people. Cross your T's, dot your I's, triple check. I mean, just be very, very detail oriented. And my most two important words is never assume. Never assume anything, you know. Then they say assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. I always bring that up to, if I speak to, you know, kids or whatever, music industry groups or whatever, because it's like, that's what sinks ships. So I always tell kids that. And also love it. If you ever feel along the way that you're not loving it, because sometimes we see these people that are just really burnt out and they're miserable, then don't do it. Throughout all those 30 plus years, it's what I do, you know. And if I stopped for a little while, I'm sure I'd miss it in 5 minutes. It's what I've always loved and hope to continue to do. And I think you just got to have a lot of love for it.
You, by far, see more music than anybody I know. You were one of those guys that are just like, you go and you see music, and it's not just new music and discovering it. It's not just the legends. You have an amazing way of seeing 2 or 3 shows in a night sometimes and going and fitting in a shitload of music. And there are only a couple people that I know that see as much music from the audience side of you as you. Like Jason Ross is big on it. There are a handful of other people, but there are not a lot of people that are like out seeing music, and it's part of your culture. Like when you were doing Bumper Shoot, it was part of programming, and you wanted to see, okay, who's the best band live? It's like, okay, yeah, I can absolutely.
And also seeing the reaction, you know, what kind of energy they have besides the technically. Also, how's the crowd reacting? How much of the crowd is there? You know, all aspects of the whole experience. I really felt was important. I still feel is very important to check out.
Yeah, and I always appreciate that, because if I called you and said, hey, come see this band, you should book them on Bumper Shoot next year. Come see what I see. You would say, okay, cool. I'll come down and check them out. Awesome. What time are they on? And then you'd send me a note. It's like, yeah, I totally get this. This makes sense. Or, no, we got too many singer-songwriters this year. Let's see how it develops. Maybe next year. But you'd always like let me know your thought process afterwards and see, oh, yeah, you're right. You were onto something. Or maybe not.
But no, I'd want to, you know, check it. I mean, there's only so much you can tell from a YouTube clip. I mean, sometimes it feels like there's more bands and singers and songwriters than people will listen to them. And there's only 24 hours in a day. I actually can't catch as much live music as I'd like, and I probably even don't quite as much nowadays compared to what I used to. Although compared to the average person, I probably do see a lot more. But I enjoy it. It's part of the fun too, and in addition to, you know, giving me knowledge of how to do my work.
It's an amazing thing. Music discovery, seeing what just clicks live with the crowd. There really is no substitute of that.
Right, there is not, you know, and that's what festivals, at least the best festivals to me, are about, what you just said, music discovery. That's, yeah, we want to have like the notable acts that are going to sell the tickets or draw the most people in or whatever, but finding those gems that fit in the whole space, you know, because I really look at putting festivals together, I really look at it as an art.
It's not just like a Jackson Pollock, through this there, through this there, through this there.
It depends on what the festival's goals are, and, you know, I respect that, you know, some have different goals than maybe any of my events do, but I want to understand what everybody does, what kind of flow is right. Because to me, putting the schedule together is really an art in that too, of the flow of the stages. Also be thinking of it in a more pragmatic way, you know, what's going to work production wise and which stage and all of that.
And also what's the fire department going to be okay with?
Right. Exactly. No, totally. You know,
here's what I envision. Here's what the fire department will allow. And here's what the production guys need.
Right. And my first few years of doing festivals, that was a challenge. And sometimes I have to...
Because it's like an overlap, right? It's almost a Venn diagram of like, you take 3 layers. This is what I want. This is what production wants. This is what the fire department's okay with. And you lay them on top of each other and try to find that compromise in the middle of what everybody can live with. And obviously the fire department has the last laugh.
No, exactly. And luckily, you know, so for the first few years, often maybe my vision did have to get changed for any of those reasons you just mentioned. I think because I've been into it so long and I've dealt with the fire department, police departments, and the production guys.
You kind of know what they're thinking already, so you know what they're looking for.
I try to head it off at the pass, you know.
So when you're in design, it's built into, oh, we need to leave this much space for an exit, and we need to leave the rows, and we needs to be there for an emergency process. Okay.
Right. So for instance, at Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, that's probably my biggest learning curve. And you know, fortunately, Sherry Steinberg, who's now the executive director, but she's been the production director that whole time, she knows all those little nuances. So sometimes I did make a suggestion. She'd be like, oh, we can't put them on that stage because of blah, blah, blah. And so that's the type of thing that I'll be learning. But in my Bumper Shoot days or any of my experiences at any of the other festivals, fortunately, over time, I would know that sort of stuff. So I'd give it something to a production guy and they'd be like, oh, okay, this looks all right to me. That's a great feeling that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel after you've already booked it.
I can't thank you enough for taking time and talking music and festivals and your career with me.
I can't thank you enough for asking me, man. It's great to be here.
I've known Chris for 15 years. Gotta say, he's one of the good ones. Loving his success. Love all this happening for him.
I am Barbara Hubbard.
Mark Campana, Ted Heinig,
Skip Richmond,
Nick Miller,
Joshua Knight,
Darren Rosen,
Brian Hill,
Greg Wolf,
Darren Zimmerman,
Scott Jampino,
Jason Bernstein.
And I'm on Promoter 101.
Promoter 101.
Promoter 101, the greatest podcast in all the land.
Hey, it's time for some birthdays this week, November 2nd to the 8th, 2018. Starting on Friday the 2nd, wishing a happy birthday to Billy Shan.
Saturday the 3rd, roadie to the stars, Mr. Chad Guy, promoter Gino Shelton, Michelle Scolari at ICM, and that beautiful Broadway agent himself, Mr. Matt Chin.
On Sunday the 4th, wishing a happy birthday to Christian Wolf and John Bell.
Hey, the 5th, that's Monday, Nick Nusaforo and Derek McBride, a pair of agents you just gotta love.
Tuesday the 6th, wishing a happy birthday to John Metz, the CAA's Danny Randall.
On the 7th, Wednesday, that's Emporium's own Angela Smith.
Thursday the 8th, we're giving a big happy birthday out to Ticketmaster's David Marcus, Jeff Franklin, Eric Dice, Paradigm/Windish, Tom Windish.
Hey, happy birthday from everybody here at Promoter 101.
Hey, it's Elliot Lefko, promoter from Goldenvoice in Los Angeles on Promoter 101.
The quote of the week comes to us from Chris Stapleton. I'm not a hustler. I don't pitch songs. I don't ask people to write for me. It's not what I do.
Very simple quote from a great man there. And Dan, we've come to the end of our bottle here. The last drops of it dripping out here. That's the end. Promoter 101, episode 107. Big thank you to everybody for tuning in today. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast. And thanks to all our guests this week. AG of Goldenvoice's Susan Rosenbluth, Chris Porter from Hardly Strictly Bluegrass, Trey Manny from Paradigm, and Dave Brooks for the news this week. We appreciate you all coming on this podcast. And to all of you out there listening, thanks for tuning in. We're going to be back next week. Same pod time, same pod place. Episode 108, Promoter 101 coming at you.
Feel free to rate us at Steiny at promoter101.net.
Tune in next week. We're going to be joined on that aforementioned episode 108 of Promoter 101 coming at you next week with some great interviews, including a full-length sit-down with Trey Manny, who was on this podcast today, as well as legendary agent and promoter Alex Kochin, and legal advice from AG's Jason Bernstein.
Just to give you a little preview, 2 weeks from now, we have the godfather of ticketing, the one and only Fred Rosen's going to be here November 15th talking about how he built Ticketmaster into a household name. So look forward to that one. That's going to be, I'm going to call it right now, pretty epic interview.
And November 22nd, we got another epic interview with Billboard Live keynote Dan and activist artist Bernie Cahill in its entirety. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks as well, too.
Until then, we're wishing you sold out shows for the, weeks to come and stuff.
Cheers.
This is Meg White from ICM, and you're listening to Promoter 101.